Hi, I'm Jim Heppelmann, PTC's President and CEO. And I'm very pleased to have a couple of minutes with you today to share with you some of the very important ways that PTC sees the global manufacturing industry transforming. One of the really great things about my job is that every year I get to interact with so many of the nearly 30,000 manufacturing enterprises that PTC has in its global customer base. And what I see and what I hear from our customers is that the manufacturing industry is going through a period of incredible transformation. And what PTC is trying to do is to align behind and enable customers to transform and react to these incredible forces that are changing the industry so that they emerge from this transformation more powerful than ever. There's a reason that PTC focuses on product and service advantage. And that's because for most of our customers, their products and their services are the basis for the relationship with their customers. It's the basis for their revenue and profits. It's the basis for their competitive advantage. But we're at a period of time where products and services are themselves undergoing a tremendous transformation. You know, the bill of material for products are changing as more electronics and software enters the picture in nearly every type of product. The environment that these products are delivered into with regulatory concerns, with connectivity and so forth is changing. And more companies are trying to transform their business model to be more service-oriented. In fact, the transformation is so great that in some cases, the very notion of products and services is converging into a single relationship with your customer through which you provide services which are enabled by products. Now, we're at a period of incredible transformation, and there's a series of forces that are behind this transformation that are pushing it along that are basically impossible to stop. And the first force that PTC responded to was the force of digitization. And simply put, this means moving from analog product and service information to digital product and service information. We got into this, nearly 25 years ago because at the time, analog information such as paper drawings were being used to capture and communicate product intent. And it turns out that this type of information is very hard for human beings to process. I think this is an engine. If you show me a few more drawings from a few more views, I'll know for sure. But I basically have to mentally reconstruct in 3D this, what this product really is. And in order to make sure the drawings and so forth are all correct, I'm probably going to have to build a physical prototype to go through a debugging process. And this would cost me lots of time and money and so forth. But thanks to technology to allow product designs to become digital and virtual, today we would do a digital mock-up. Nearly every one of our customers does this today, and it saves tremendous amounts of time and tremendous amounts of error, quite frankly. So one example of a PTC customer, one of many that I'd like to talk about, is a company called College Park. Now, College Park makes prosthetic feet. And it turns out that humans have feet that are somewhat unique and different from each other because the bodies they're attached to are different. So when you try to replace a natural foot with a prosthetic foot, that foot has to be engineered according to the physical characteristics of the person who will wear it, and of course, how they're going to use it and so forth. I mean, you can see in this little example that as this man transfers his weight onto that prosthetic foot as he's climbing onto this rock, he's going to put a lot of load on that foot. So we need to be able to very quickly engineer and validate that that design is going to work for that person so that we can get this foot designed, validated, and manufactured in weeks in order to respond to the need for the prosthetic. So that shows the example of the benefit for engineering, but there are so many downstream benefits. For example, we've learned that digital product data that was created initially for the benefit of engineering can be used on the factory floor in the form of digital work instructions and so forth, or it can even be used now in a 3D printer, which goes directly from digital concept to physical deliverable. Now, that's an area where there's a lot of innovation going on, but one of the places where PTC is delivering a lot of additional innovation is in the use of that digital product for service information. Now, all of us have seen this picture. Anybody who produces a product with any degree of complexity has to produce a lot of information for their downstream customers, explaining how to install and set up and use and maintain and repair that product. And we all know that this type of information is very difficult to process. In fact, it turns out that printed textual information is one of the least bandwidth methods to move information into the human brain. Humans do a much better job of processing graphics. So we've transformed the way that this information, for example, how to take apart a type of medical device that might be used in a hospital, how to take it apart and repair it, can be created very quickly based on the engineering data and then delivered in this graphical format to the downstream service technicians who can learn so much information in the universal language of digital graphics. So it's a very powerful concept. Now that's an example of one force, which I characterized as digitization. But in fact, at PTC, we've been tracking 7 major forces, digitization just being the first one. Now what's very interesting about digitization is that when information becomes digital, it becomes portable. And that is one of the great enablers for globalization, which is the second force I'd like to talk about. Globalization really means how the world has shrunk so much because of technology that allows us to collaborate and share information so quickly across widespread geographic divisions. And it opens up new opportunities, new markets, new competitors, and so forth. Now, the great thing about globalization is changed the way that we develop products. You know, we used to think of a great product coming from a really intelligent person. You know, there have been many great inventors in history. You know, whether it's Rudolf Diesel, who invented the diesel engine, or Thomas Edison that led to General Electric, or, you know, so many more. But today, given product complexity, that's not the way innovation can happen anymore. Today, innovation, by necessity, ends up being a multicultural, multinational, collaborative team experience. And so companies like PTC have created the type of technology that allows companies to work collaboratively in this type of environment. And I'd argue that you have to work in this environment today. In fact, a recent study said that by 2025, 70% of the demand for manufactured products will come from countries that today we classify as emerging geographies. And that's very interesting because that means that if you want to live in the 100%, you're going to need to be in the 70% emerging geographies. And you're going to have to build products that make sense for those geographies. And if a company thinks they can just live in the developed world, then they're going to leave the 70% of the demand uncovered. Some competitor will cover that demand and then with greater scale come back into the 30%. So it's a practical necessity for companies to be global. The question is how to do it efficiently. So we have a number of customers, thousands of them, who have implemented a concept known as design anywhere, build anywhere. And some tag on the back, sell and service everywhere. And a great example of such a customer is AGCO. Now, AGCO is a diversified manufacturer of agriculture equipment. It turns out that AGCO sells their products in more than 140 countries through more than 3,000 dealers. So they really do need to be able to design products anywhere, manufacture them anywhere, but be able to sell them and service them virtually everywhere on earth. And it's a great story of a customer who's implemented both digitization and globalization technology to enable this type of business model to work. Now, what AGCO and, of course, many others find when they globalize is that they run into a strong headwind, which is the next force I'd like to talk about, being regulation. And by regulation, I'm just referring to all those rules that control the type of products you deliver, how you can manufacture those products, how those products have to work in environmental concerns, safety concerns, and so forth. So, we used to think of business being two companies sit down, agree on a set of requirements and a contract, ink the contract, and go to work. But today it's so much more complicated than that. In fact, in the last 20 years, there have been more than 3,000 new product regulations levied upon manufacturing companies. Many of these regulations are coming from government bodies, but many of them as well are coming from industry bodies. Things like, United Laboratories or Reach and Rose and so forth. These are commonplace terms that we see in our business environment. One of the latest is this latest regulation from the U.S. Securities Exchange, which is around conflict minerals. These so-called 3TG minerals, which are tungsten, tantalum, tin, and gold, and all the alloys that you'd make from those minerals. So it turns out that in this latest regulation, we're trying to control how these minerals fuel an ongoing civil war in the Republic of Congo. So by making companies understand whether or not they use these minerals, and if so, where did they come from, we can try to stop the funding of this civil war and bring the Republic of Congo back to a period of greater prosperity. So that's the intent of the regulation, but it's one more thing that you need to think about as a product producer, particularly in this case if you're a U.S. public company or a supplier to a U.S. public company. So a great example of a customer we've been working with here is Motorola. And I'm really talking about that division of Google that makes Motorola cell phones. And it turns out that Google, in this case Google Mobility, was an early company to realize that for reasons of corporate social responsibility and otherwise, that they ought to really understand from an environmental and from a political aspect what is going into their products. So they worked with PTC years ago to put in place the analytical models to analyze designs and try to understand, are they ROSE compliant, REACH compliant, and now lately, are they conflict minerals compliant? So that's a great example of applying software to some of the regulatory concerns and the regulatory force. Now, the other side of being global is the need for personalization of products, because it turns out that people in different parts of the world don't want exactly the same thing. Now, for purposes of this discussion, by personalization, I'm going to say being able to efficiently tailor products and services to accommodate either regional or personal preferences. And this word efficient is important because anybody can produce a one-off product. The question is, can you produce it at a price point and a quality point that works for your customers? And that's where you need to balance the customer need for diversity with your need for scale in economies of scale. So a great example of diversity at the regional level might be automobiles. In the UK, you see cars that have the steering wheel on the right side. In the US, you see cars that have the steering wheel on the left side. That's an example of a regional difference. Now, there are so many more. They might use different fuel. They might have different emission systems. They might have different wheelbase or whatnot because of regulatory concerns and so forth. So there are many different types. Now, an example of a customer of ours who has mastered this concept of diversity with scale is Volvo Truck. Now, Volvo Truck makes heavy trucks under a number of different brands that are sold throughout the world. And it turns out that they rarely make the same truck twice. Every year, they make hundreds of thousands of trucks in more than 100,000 configurations. And that's because the truck has to be adjusted to the regional requirements and as well to the requirements of the driver or the business that's buying the truck as well. And it turns out that, depending upon what the truck is going to be used for, there are many different things that could be configured differently, and hence you rarely make the same truck twice. Which means you need to be pretty good at making trucks that are, different configurations and so forth. What's interesting is when you think about product diversity, you can only go so far with mechanical diversity, even, for example, if you deploy a platform strategy. Sooner or later, to get down to, true uniqueness at the personal level, you begin to bring in a lot of manufacturing cost. And that's where many companies have switched from hardware diversity to software diversity. And I love the example of today's modern mobile phones. You could have an iPhone or an Android phone or a Windows phone or whatever. And if you pull the phone out of your pocket or your briefcase or your purse and you compare it to your colleagues, you see that they're all different. And the reason that they're different is because we've taken this concept of design for postponement to the ultimate degree, which is that the final parts in the bill of material are put on the phone by the customer at the customer's site, or in most cases at the customer's home, when they log on to the App Store and begin to download and install things on the phone that really customize that phone, to their own personal preference. So this shows you how far one can go with product diversity without very much compromising economies of scale whatsoever. Now, software brings in this last mile of diversity, but it does so much more. And it's not just limited to phones. This really brings us to the next force I'd like to talk about, which is software. You know, there was a famous paper written a year or two ago by Mark Andreessen that was titled "Software is Eating the World." And the gist of this paper was, if you're a manufacturer, you better be good at software, because software is beginning to occupy so much of the bill of material and contribute so much to the differentiation of products that your ability to succeed as a manufacturer is going to become somewhat dependent in a very big way on your ability to develop great software. So when I'm talking about software-intensive products, I'm really talking about smart products, products that have hardware, but they also have software. They may have mechanical and electrical and electronic and software. They may be smart and interactive and so forth. Now, there will always be products that aren't smart, although I think with every passing day, there are fewer of them. In fact, there are many blenders that do contain software and electronics. But on the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum, there are products that are completely defined by their software. This is an example of Embraer business jet, who's one of PTC's larger customers, by the way. And in this type of an environment, it would be very difficult to be competitive in this environment without this kind of high-tech electronics and software-defined cockpit experience for the pilot and for the owner as well. Now, software isn't just entering the picture in high-end products, it's in everyday consumer products like your refrigerator. This is an example of a GE appliance, another customer of ours. And there's a lot of software that allows you to control and to configure and to interact with this product in a smart, intelligent way. A great customer story I like to share is Continental. Now, Continental is a Tier 1 automotive supplier. Many people think of Continental as a tire company, but in fact, the bulk of Continental's business comes from systems. An example of a Continental automotive system would be a windshield wiper system. Now, maybe you all remember when you used to have cars that didn't have automated rain-sensing windshield wipers, and then on a day when it was raining just a little bit, you'd have to turn them on. They would wipe your window dry and start screeching. You'd turn them off, and then 10 seconds later, you'd have to turn them back on and then back off, and you had to do that constantly as you drove down the road. But today, of course, almost every car has smart windshield wipers. Use sensors to detect moisture on the windshield. It wipes the windshield. When the moisture's done, they shut off until that condition arises again, and they go back through the cycle. Now, that's just a simple example. It turns out that that rain sensor can also close the windows of your car if it starts raining while you're in the grocery store and so forth. It's just become a very smart type of subsystem in an automobile. Now, what's very interesting is that Continental employs something around 18,000 engineers in their product development ranks, and about 12,000 of them now are software engineers. And I think it goes to show just how much, for example, the automotive business has been transformed by software-intensive products. So software-intensive products then bring up the next force, because it raises the question, if I have a product and it has a CPU and it has a software capability, why don't I just give it an IP address and a little bit of Wi-Fi or other wireless, Bluetooth, what have you, connectivity, and then I have a connected product? And so by connected, I'm really talking about products hooking themselves up to the internet. And not the internet of computers, but the internet of things, where the things on the internet aren't traditional computers. They actually are computers, but they're just not traditional computers like laptops or desktops or servers or something like that. They're refrigerators and automobiles and maybe even blenders. But they're talking to each other, talking to the manufacturer, talking to other systems that are able to monitor and control them and so forth. Now again, there will continue to be products that don't have connectivity, although many people can tell you a list of reasons why it'd be nice to know where that wheelbarrow's at any point in time during the workday and so forth. But on the other hand, there are products that have been conceived just because of connectivity. This is a great example of a product. This is from the quantified self trend, a Nike fuel band, that's used to basically be a human sensor, a sensor that monitors your activity and then uploads that data into a central database in the cloud so that your activity can be compared to your activity goals, it can be compared to your peers, It can be compared to the team you're competing with and so forth. And it does a great job of monitoring what you're doing. Now, you can take it to much greater extents than that. Here's an example of remote-controlled surgery. So you see the doctors are interacting with very sophisticated computer systems, and they're controlling a robotic surgery device, which in this example happens to be in the same room, but clearly it could be 1,000 miles away and you'd get the same result. So that shows the power of things being connected together on the internet, where they're able to communicate and interact with each other and with centralized systems and so forth. A great example of a customer who's put this idea to work is Schneider Electric, the French company. Schneider has developed a business capability around smart, connected building automation. So from a central control panel, Schneider can monitor and control a portfolio of buildings, monitor their energy use, their lights, their security, their occupancy, their temperature and human comfort, and so forth. And by being able to see all these different parameters in real time, they can optimize how this building works and save about 20% on the energy consumption of a building like this, which is a dramatic savings, if you own this building or even, a portfolio of them. And that really speaks to the power of smart and connected product capabilities. The last force I'd like to talk about is the one that really stands to benefit from all of these others, which is servitization. And by servitization, I mean the transformation of business models toward more and more services. So maybe you start with a product, and then you have a product with a service, and then you start restructuring that service maybe into warranty or into performance-based type of contracts. And maybe someday you end up just using the product to deliver the service and you don't even sell the product anymore. That's really different degrees of servitization, but we see this as a trend that is unstoppable in the manufacturing industry. Now, there are many good reasons people want to own products. It's kind of fun to own your own car and park it in your garage and so forth. But with that automobile comes some real responsibility. You have to maintain it. You have to insure it. You have to take care of it. And the same is true for business products, business-to-business products. On the top of just about every office building, you see some kind of heating, ventilating, air conditioning equipment that looks something like this. And that's an asset that most companies buy, and then they need to have a technician and spare parts and maintenance procedures and so forth. And there's a lot of companies that say, I just wanted my building to be comfortable. Do I really have to buy all that stuff? About 20 years ago, Rolls-Royce had a real breakthrough when they said, I know, rather than sell you jet engines and spare parts and technicians and maintenance programs and so forth, why don't I just sell you the utility of the engine, which is thrust for your airplanes? I will sell you power by the hour. I will retain ownership of the engines, but my engines will provide to you power. You will pay me for the power that my engines provide. And this really began this whole rethinking of the business model of products and services. And now it's been applied in many different ways, and we continue to see new examples all the time. In Boston, where PTC is headquartered, we have this concept called Hubway bicycles. This is bicycles as a service, where you join the club, you get a card, you stick your card in the bicycle rack, it releases the bicycle, you ride the bicycle for a while, you leave it at another rack, and you walk away from it. You don't have to worry if it rains, you don't have to take it up to your apartment, you don't have to worry about it being stolen. You had the utility of transportation, now you're done with it, you just release the product back to its rightful owner. It's kind of an interesting model. A customer I'd like to talk about who's applied it actually to this heating, ventilating, and air conditioning example is Ingersoll Rand, and in particular the train division of Ingersoll Rand. So they actually have implemented this business model of selling comfort. You pay them to maintain your building at 71 degrees, and that's what they charge you for. It's up to train to figure out what equipment is needed, what parts, what technicians, how to monitor the equipment, how to make it efficient. That's not what you're paying for. You're paying for the utility of that in this new business model. And at Train, this business model has offered them an explosive new type of growth in their product suite. Any one of these 7 forces I've talked about by themselves is a big deal. Your ability to master this force can give you an advantage, or your failure to could give you a disadvantage versus your competitors. But when you think of them all as a package, and they all interplay in really interesting ways, then you see that this concept is totally transformational for a manufacturing company. And at PTC, we're pleased to engage and to help our company, our customers react to these forces and to transform the way they think about their company, the way they create products, the way they service products, and help ensure that, well into the future, they continue to be successful, dynamic enterprises out there in the world. So thank you for this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about PTC and some of our thinking about product and service advantage. And, we're looking forward to engaging you and continuing to work with you well into the future. Thank you very much.